My name is Victoria and Hartwell. I'm 29 years old, and exactly 48 hours after my father's funeral, my sister Diane sent me a text message that changed everything. Just signed the final papers, she wrote, followed by a laughing emoji. Thanks for being so understanding about Dad's wishes. Some of us were just closer to him, I guess. I stared at that message for 3 full minutes, my coffee growing cold in my hands, before the reality fully sank in. She had taken everything, the entire $340,000 inheritance, the lake house in Michigan, even Dad's vintage Mustang that he'd promised me since I was 16 years old. And she was laughing about it. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. Another message from Diane. Don't be dramatic about this. You'll be fine. You always land on your feet. Then a photo, her standing in front of Dad's house. Now her house. Champagne glass raised to the camera, that same smug smile she'd worn at every family gathering where she managed to position herself as the favorite daughter. Before I explain exactly how I systematically dismantled her perfect little world, let me know where you're viewing from in the comments and hit subscribe if you've ever had a family member steal what was rightfully yours. The thing is, I should have seen this coming from miles away. To really understand why Diane felt entitled to take everything Dad had worked 43 years to build, you'd have to go back 7 years to when Mom died suddenly from a brain aneurysm. She was 54 years old, completely healthy one morning, gone by evening. Dad fell apart completely. He stopped going to work at the accounting firm where he'd been a partner for 20 years. He stopped showering regularly, stopped answering phone calls, spent entire days in his recliner staring at game shows he wasn't really watching. I was 22 then, fresh out of college with a marketing degree and $43,000 in student loans weighing on me. Diane was 27, married to her college boyfriend Trevor, living in a beautiful renovated brownstone in Chicago that Trevor's parents had bought them as a wedding gift. She had a life already established, settled, comfortable. I was still figuring mine out, living in a cramped studio apartment with a leaking ceiling and a radiator that only worked on Tuesdays. When it became clear that Dad couldn't function alone, I made a choice that would define the next 7 years of my life. I turned down a promising job offer in Seattle, $58,000 starting salary plus benefits, and moved back home to Wisconsin. Back to the small town where I'd grown up, back to the house that still smelled like Mom's lavender sachets, back to taking care of a father who barely recognized I was in the room most days. Diane visited exactly 4 times that first year. Each visit lasted approximately 36 hours, during which she would rearrange Mom's things without asking, critique my caregiving methods, and remind Dad how successful her marketing firm in Chicago was doing. Trevor just landed the Millbrook account, she'd say brightly over dinner I'd spent 2 hours preparing. They're talking about making him junior partner before he's even 35. Dad would nod, fork halfway to his mouth, and murmur something appropriate. Then Diane would glance at me and ask with false concern, "How's the job search going, Vic?" Knowing perfectly well I couldn't job search because I was too busy making sure Dad remembered to take his blood pressure medication and didn't leave the stove on when he tried to make midnight tea. My best friend Amber saw it all clearly from the start. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and would stop by after her shifts to check on Dad and me. "She's setting you up," Amber warned me one evening after Diane's 3rd visit. "She's establishing herself as the successful daughter while you're the one who couldn't launch her own life. When push comes to shove, guess who Dad's going to remember more fondly?" I brushed it off then, believing the naive notion that blood meant loyalty, that family meant doing what was right even when it was hard, that my sacrifices would be recognized and appreciated when it mattered most. I was so stupidly wrong about all of it. The pattern continued and intensified over the next 7 years. I became Dad's full-time caregiver, cook, chauffeur, medication manager, social coordinator, and financial administrator. I handled his bills, scheduled his doctor appointments, organized his tax documents, managed his retirement accounts. I gave up dating. Who wants to deal with a 20-something woman still living with her father? I gave up career advancement. I took a part-time remote position making $31,000 annually, barely enough to cover my own expenses. I gave up my independence, my social life, my entire 20s. Meanwhile, Diane visited on major holidays and Dad's birthday, always arriving with expensive gifts and dramatic stories about her fabulous Chicago life. She'd regale him with tales of client dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, weekend getaways to Napa Valley, the new Lexus Trevor surprised her with for their anniversary. Dad would light up during these visits in a way he never did during our quiet daily routine of physical therapy appointments and early bird dinners. Diane's really made something of herself, he told me once after she'd left, his tone carrying an unmistakable note of pride that cut deeper than he could possibly know. She's doing great, Dad, I agreed, not bothering to mention that I'd spent the previous night researching memory care facilities because his doctor was concerned about early signs of dementia, or that I'd maxed out my credit card paying for his new hearing aids because Medicare only covered the basic model that gave him headaches. There were 5 specific moments over those 7 years that should have warned me what was coming. 5 times when Diane's true character showed itself clearly, but I was too exhausted, too invested in my martyr role, too convinced that goodness would ultimately be rewarded to see the truth staring me in the face. Moment 1. Dad's 65th birthday party. I spent 3 weeks planning an intimate gathering at his favorite Italian restaurant, Marcello's, coordinating with his old work friends and neighbors. The total cost was $1,847, every penny from my own savings. Diane flew in the morning of the party, walked into Marcello's private dining room 15 minutes late, and announced to everyone assembled, I wanted to throw Dad something really special at the Peninsula in Chicago, but Victoria insisted on keeping it small and local. She smiled at me sweetly. Some of us prefer intimate over impressive, I suppose. Dad beamed at her, patting her hand. It's the thought that counts, sweetheart. Thank you for coming all this way. I stood in the corner holding a birthday cake I'd spent 4 hours decorating with his favorite baseball team's colors, tasting something bitter in the back of my throat. Moment 2. When Dad fell and broke his hip, requiring surgery and 6 weeks of intensive rehabilitation. I took family medical leave from my already part-time job, losing what little income one had. I slept on a cot in his hospital room for 9 nights, advocated with his doctors and insurance company, researched the best rehabilitation centers within our budget. Diane sent flowers, a $200 arrangement from some upscale Chicago florist, and called twice, each conversation lasting approximately 11 minutes before she had to run to a meeting. When Dad was finally discharged and I was driving him to the rehab facility, he looked at the flowers still sitting on his kitchen table and said, Diane has such good taste. Those must have cost a fortune. They're beautiful, I agreed, not mentioning that I'd spent the previous 3 nights sleeping 4 hours total, or that I'd burned through my entire emergency fund paying for the wheelchair-accessible shower modifications his insurance wouldn't cover. Moment 3. Christmas 2 years ago. I'd saved for 8 months to buy Dad the vintage record player he'd been wanting, the one that could play his old 78s from the 1950s. It cost $892, nearly a month's salary for me. I wrapped it carefully, excited to see his face when he opened it. Diane arrived on Christmas Eve with a box from Bang & Olufsen, a complete home sound system worth approximately $7,500 according to the discreet price tag I spotted when she was unwrapping it for him. I know how much you love your music, Daddy, she said, and he actually teared up, hugging her tightly. My record player sat unopened in the corner for the rest of the day. When I finally left around 10 p.m., exhausted from cooking Christmas dinner for 12 people, Dad called after me, "Drive safe, honey. And thank you for the player. That was very thoughtful." Thoughtful. The word felt like a participation trophy. Moment 4. When Dad's longtime financial advisor, Mr. Chen, retired and recommended I take over formally managing Dad's accounts since I was already handling his day-to-day finances. I had spreadsheets tracking every expense, every investment, every bill payment. I taught myself basic portfolio management through free online courses, saved Dad $23,400 over 3 years by refinancing his mortgage at a lower rate, and identified $7,100 in duplicate insurance charges that I got refunded. Diane heard about this arrangement during one of her quarterly visits and immediately called Dad from Chicago. I heard his side of the conversation from the kitchen where I was meal prepping his diabetic-friendly lunches for the week. "No, no, Diane. Victoria's doing a fine job," he said. "She's very organized with these things." A pause. "Well, yes, I suppose you do have more experience in business." Another pause. "I just don't want to burden you when you're so busy with your own career." She didn't push further then, but I should have recognized it as reconnaissance, gathering information about assets and control for future use. Moment 5. The final warning I completely missed. About 8 months before Dad died, Diane started visiting more frequently. Not every 2 months anymore, but every 3 weeks. She'd arrive late Friday afternoon, spend Saturday with Dad, and leave Sunday morning. I told myself she was finally stepping up, finally recognizing that our father was aging and needed family connection. What she was actually doing was staging an elaborate long con. During those visits, she'd take Dad out for long lunches at nice restaurants, the kind I couldn't afford on my income, and they'd have private conversations I wasn't part of. She'd bring photo albums from her childhood, remind him of father-daughter dances and soccer games he'd coached. She was systematically rewriting history, painting herself as the devoted daughter who'd simply had the misfortune of living far away, while positioning me as the live-in caregiver who'd never quite launched into real adulthood. "Remember when I won that writing contest in 5th grade and you took me for ice cream?" she'd say, laughing. "Or when you taught me to drive stick shift in the Mustang and I kept stalling out?" Dad would laugh too, memory clearly activated in ways our daily routine of medication schedules and doctor appointments never triggered. "You were always so determined," he'd say fondly. I would sit at the kitchen table, supposedly working on my laptop but actually listening to their laughter from the living room, feeling something dark and uncomfortable growing in my chest. Not jealousy exactly, more like the slowly dawning realization that I'd been playing an entirely different game than my sister this whole time. Amber warned me again during this period. "Vic, you need to make sure the will is clear," she said over coffee one Saturday morning. "I've seen this 100 times at the hospital. The caregiver child assumes their sacrifice will be recognized, but the absent child is the one who gets remembered fondly because they only showed up for the highlight reel." "Dad knows what I've done for him," I insisted. "He sees it every single day. Does he, though?" Amber asked gently. "Or does he just see it as your life, what you chose, while Diane's visits are special events he looks forward to?" I didn't answer because the truth was starting to hurt too much to examine directly. The moment Dad's condition became critical happened on a Tuesday in late October. I found him unresponsive in his bedroom at 6:47 a.m., called 911, rode with him in the ambulance, stayed by his bedside in the ICU for 18 hours straight. The doctors said it was a massive stroke, that he likely wouldn't recover consciousness, that we should start thinking about end-of-life decisions. I called Diane at 9:15 p.m. that night, my voice hoarse from crying and talking to medical staff for 13 hours straight. "You need to come now," I told her. "They're saying maybe 48 hours, maybe less." She arrived the next evening, 24 hours later, rolling an expensive leather suitcase behind her, makeup perfect, hair professionally styled. "How is he?" she asked, not looking at Dad's unconscious form in the hospital bed, but at me, evaluating my unwashed hair and rumpled clothes. "He's dying, Diane," I said flatly. "The neurologist says there's been catastrophic brain damage. We need to discuss removing life support." Something flickered across her face then, not grief exactly, but something calculating and quick that vanished before I could properly identify it. "Let's not be hasty," she said. "Let me talk to the doctors myself first. Get a second opinion." He died at 2:33 a.m. on a Friday morning. The nurses were kind. They gave us time alone with his body before they had to move him. Diane cried dramatically, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. I sat dry-eyed, all my tears somehow already spent, feeling hollowed out and ancient despite being only 29 years old. The funeral was the following Wednesday. I'd planned everything according to Dad's wishes, Wishes I knew because we discussed them multiple times during the past 7 years. Small service at St. Matthew's Episcopal, cremation afterward, ashes to be scattered at Crystal Lake where he'd taken us fishing as children. The total cost was $8,400, which I put on my credit card because I didn't have access to Dad's accounts without death certificates and probate. Diane gave a beautiful eulogy. She talked about Dad's integrity, his work ethic, his devotion to family. She referenced specific memories of their time together with perfect recall, painting a picture of a devoted daughter who'd cherished every moment with her father despite the geographical distance. People who didn't know our family history would have thought she'd been the primary caregiver, the devoted child who'd sacrificed everything. The will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. in Dad's attorney's office, Mr. Patrick Harrison, who'd handled Dad's legal affairs for 26 years. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the only professional dress I owned that still fit properly. Diane was already there, sitting in one of the leather chairs in the waiting area, scrolling through her phone with perfectly manicured nails. Mr. Harrison's office was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town attorney. Wood paneling, degrees framed on the wall, a massive desk covered in orderly stacks of papers. He gestured for us to sit, his expression professionally neutral. "First, let me say again how sorry I am for your loss," he began. "Robert was a good man and a valued client." We both nodded. "Now, I need to inform you that your father made significant changes to his estate plan approximately 4 months ago." 4 months ago. Right in the middle of Diane's increased visitation period. Something cold started forming in my stomach. Mr. Harrison continued, reading from the official document. The estate consists of the family home, valued at approximately $340,000, the lake house property in Michigan, valued at $180,000, investment accounts totaling $520,000, a 1967 Ford Mustang, and various personal effects. Over $1 million. I'd known Dad was comfortable, but I'd never realized the full scope. My mouth went dry. Robert has left the entirety of his estate to his daughter Diane Mitchell, with the exception of $10,000 to be given to Victoria Hartwell for her years of care, to be paid out in monthly installments of $500 over 20 months. The room went absolutely silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, hear Diane's sharp intake of breath that sounded almost performative, hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice sounding distant and strange. "Could you repeat that?" Mr. Harrison's expression was sympathetic but professional. "Your father left his entire estate to Diane, with a small bequest to you of $10,000. "But I don't understand," I said stupidly. "I've been taking care of him for 7 years. I gave up everything. Diane was barely here." "I know this must be shocking," Mr. Harrison said carefully. "Your father's rationale, as he explained it to me, was that Diane had established her own successful life and career, while you had chosen to remain at home as his caregiver. He felt that Diane had proven herself more financially responsible and capable of managing the estate properly." The words landed like physical blows. Financially responsible. Capable. All the code words for successful, while my sacrifice was reframed as failure to launch, as choosing the easy path of living at home instead of building a real career like my ambitious sister. Diane made a sound beside me. When I looked at her, I saw tears in her eyes, but behind them was something else, something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction masked as shock. "Victoria, I had no idea," she said. I'm as surprised as you are." She was lying. I knew it instantly, viscerally, with complete certainty. She'd known exactly what she was doing during those increased visits, exactly what narrative she was building in Dad's declining mind. "When did he make these changes?" I asked Mr. Harrison, my voice surprisingly steady. He checked the document. The revised will was executed on June 14th. June 14th. 2 days after one of Diane's weekend visits. 2 days after a lunch they'd had at Riverside Bistro, one of Dad's favorite restaurants, where I assumed they'd just been having a nice father-daughter meal. I walked out of that office at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, and something fundamental inside me cracked open. Not broke, cracked. There's a difference. Breaking implies destruction. Cracking implies something new being exposed, something that had been building pressure for years finally finding a release point. That night, I sat on my bed and opened my laptop. Then I did something I should have done years ago. I looked at my options without the lens of obligation, guilt, or martyrdom. I evaluated my situation with clear, cold logic. I had skills. 7 years of managing a complex household, coordinating medical care, handling finances, administering estate matters. I had references: Dad's doctor, his physical therapist, Mr. Chen, the financial advisor who'd mentored me in portfolio management. I had quantifiable achievements: that $23,400 in mortgage savings, the $7,100 in recovered insurance overcharges, years of meticulous financial records. The person who'd given up her 20s to sacrifice for her family was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned a very expensive lesson about the difference between being valued and being useful, between sacrifice and self-destruction. I updated my resume for the first time in 7 years. Within 3 days, I had phone interviews scheduled with 4 companies. Within 2 weeks, I had 2 in-person interview requests, one in Minneapolis for a senior estate management position at $64,000 annually, another in Denver for a client services manager role at a wealth management firm, $71,000 plus bonuses. Meanwhile, Diane was moving forward with probate with impressive speed. She hired an estate attorney from Chicago, listed Dad's house with a realtor by the end of the first week, and sent me a formal notice that I needed to vacate the premises within 30 days. What Diane didn't know was that during my 7 years as Dad's caregiver and financial manager, I'd become extremely thorough about record-keeping. I had spreadsheets tracking every penny I'd spent on Dad's care, every hour I'd logged, every expense I'd covered when his accounts came up short. I also had something else. Something I'd stumbled across 6 months before Dad died, evidence that Diane had been systematically manipulating our father's perception of reality. I started paying attention after Dad mentioned casually, "Diane tells me you've been having trouble finding work. She's worried about you." I'd been confused. What? I have work. I've been doing that remote marketing role for 3 years now. So I started documenting everything. I set up my phone to record audio whenever Diane visited. Over 6 months, I accumulated approximately 14 hours of recordings showing Diane systematically undermining my credibility, subtly suggesting I was taking advantage of Dad. The most damning recording came from May 28, about 3 weeks before Dad revised his will. Diane's voice came through clearly. "I've been thinking about your estate planning, Daddy. Have you considered that Victoria might not be equipped to handle a large inheritance? She's never had to manage real money. She's been living in a kind of protected bubble here with you." "Victoria's been very responsible," Dad's voice responded uncertainly. Of course," Diane soothed. "But there's a difference between managing household bills and managing a substantial estate. I just worry that a large inheritance might actually be a burden for her. She might make poor decisions, might get taken advantage of. Perhaps the bulk of the estate should go to whoever is most equipped to preserve and grow it. Someone with business experience, proven success. Then that person could ensure Victoria is taken care of appropriately." Long pause. Then Dad's voice. "What would you suggest?" "Just thinking that perhaps you should consider who can best manage what you've built," Diane said carefully. I'd listened to that recording 17 times, feeling something dark and purposeful building in my chest. Now, sitting in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight the will through legal channels. Instead, I was going to take away everything Diane actually loved, using the very same tools she'd used against me. First, I accepted the position in Denver, the $71,000 role with the $5,000 relocation bonus. I signed the offer letter feeling power returning to my body. Second, I completed my documentation. I calculated the value of my labor using standard caregiver hourly rates, $23 per hour, multiplied by hours logged over 7 years. Total, $287,400 in caregiving services. Then out-of-pocket expenses, $31,200 for home modifications, $18,700 for medications, $9,400 for transportation, $12,800 for household expenses, $8,400 for funeral costs. Total, $80,500. Combined total value of my investment, $367,900. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report with receipts, statements, photographs, and recordings. Third, I needed intelligence. I messaged Trevor's younger brother Derek, who I'd known in high school. Random question. I heard Diane and Trevor might be having financial trouble. True or gossip? Derek responded, more like financial overreach. They leveraged everything to buy this massive place in Lincoln Park last year. Down payment cleaned out their savings. Trevor's been stressed about the $8,700 monthly mortgage payments. Diane's firm lost a major client. Why? I filed that information carefully. I moved to Denver on schedule. Diane sold Dad's house within 3 weeks for $355,000. Then I sent a carefully crafted letter to Trevor's father, Warren Mitchell, a retired federal judge known for fierce integrity. Dear Mr. Mitchell, I'm writing regarding concern about my sister Diane's actions related to my late father's estate. I've enclosed documentation including time-stamped audio recordings, financial records, and statements establishing a pattern of systematic manipulation of our father during declining mental capacity to alter his testamentary intentions in her favor. The recordings include explicit discussions of strategies to portray me as financially incompetent despite 7 years of documented successful estate management. I believe you should be aware of these circumstances given your son's marriage to Diane. I'm not requesting action, simply providing information I believe you're entitled to have. With respect, Victoria Hartwell. I included a USB drive with everything. Warren received it on a Thursday at 10:47 a.m. The first crack appeared 9 days later. Derek messaged, "Something weird is happening. My dad's been asking Trevor questions about their finances and Diane's relationship with your dad. Trevor's freaking out." 2 weeks later, Diane called, voice tight with panic. "I don't know what you've done or sent to Warren, but you need to stop immediately. This is causing serious problems in my marriage. Call me back right now." I texted, "I have no idea what you're talking about. Are you and Trevor having problems?" 3 days later, Derek called. My dad confronted Diane at family dinner about recordings he received. He played them at the table. Asked Trevor if he'd benefited from fraudulently obtained inheritance. My dad's threatening to cut them off financially if Diane doesn't make this right. They need that support because their mortgage is $8,700 monthly and Diane's firm is struggling. Over the following month, Warren cut off all financial support, approximately $3,200 monthly. He made clear to everyone why, through statements about ethical standards. Diane's firm lost 2 more clients connected to Warren's network. The Michigan Lake House sat unsold for months before Diane reduced the price from $195,000 to $164,000. Trevor's junior partner consideration stalled. Diane called repeatedly. I answered once every 5 calls, pleasant but distant. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said, voice ragged. "We're sisters." "I haven't created any drama," I said calmly. "If you're having problems with Warren, that's between you." "You're destroying my marriage," she said through tears. "Trevor looks at me differently. His family thinks I'm a con artist. Our finances are collapsing. I might lose my business." "That sounds really hard," I said honestly. "I hope things improve." "Please," she begged. "I'll give you half of everything. Just make this stop. I don't want Dad's inheritance, I said, realizing it was true. What I wanted was for him to see me, to value what I did. That can't be bought now. Then what do you want? I'm not doing anything. I'm just living my life. You're the one who has to live with what you did. 6 months after moving to Denver, Mr. Harrison called. Diane is requesting the estate be reopened. She's offering to transfer $150,000 to you, citing new information about circumstances surrounding your father's will. Tell Diane I'll accept $200,000 plus the Mustang, I replied. That's 40% of the estate. She may not agree. Then she can keep dealing with Warren's disapproval. Diane agreed within 24 hours. The Mustang arrived on a Saturday morning. The $200,000 transferred on Tuesday afternoon. I paid off my debts, bought a house, invested the rest. Then I used $10,000 to establish a scholarship in Dad's name for non-traditional students returning to education after caring for family. A year after Dad's funeral, I stood in my Denver kitchen making coffee, looking at mountains, feeling complete peace. According to Derek, Diane and Trevor are still together but struggling. They sold their Lincoln Park property, moved to a smaller place. Her firm downsized. Trevor didn't make partner. The $10,000 Dad left me I donated to Alzheimer's research. My sister took my inheritance and laughed. In response, I took away her stability, security, and peace of mind. Not through revenge, but through refusing to carry her choices. Have you ever had family betray you so completely? Share your story in the comments. If this resonated, hit subscribe. Remember, family isn't defined by DNA. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and letting consequences follow. The Mustang sits in my garage now. I drive it every Sunday through mountains, thinking about the girl who believed sacrifice equals love. She was naive but had a good heart. I hope she knows I finally learned, you can't make people see your worth by sacrificing more. You can only see it by sacrificing less. Thanks for watching.